Hi, I'm Paul Stringfellow, and welcome to another episode of Tech Takeaways. As ever, I'm joined by my dynamic co-host, who's way better at doing introductions than I am, because he's got the whole cutting up into little slicey things that I'm not even trying to compete with anymore. It's Jason Fitzgerald. Hi, Jason.
Hello.
How you doing? You okay?
Yeah, good. Yeah,
good.
Yeah, how are you?
I'm good. Yeah,
Excellent.
I feel like we've had this conversation before. A little bit of behind the scenes podcast trickery there. So we're going to do something we don't do very often, because we like the information we share in these shows to be relevant for a time to come, and I'm sure this will be as well. But we're recording this 5 days after a big cyber impact incident. So it wasn't a cybersecurity incident, but many of you will be aware of a couple of incidents that we saw 5 days ago. So Friday the 19th, Friday 19th,
Yep.
Anyway, some point in July. We're recording this a few days after, where we had incidents with Microsoft and CrowdStrike. And those were not related incidents, even though there was a little bit of conflation at the beginning. And we just wanted to kind of pick through a little bit about what we saw happen, what unrolled over, probably over kind of a 24-hour period. And then is there anything that we can kind of take away from that? So why don't we start there, Jason? I just want to give a little bit of an intro into just if somebody was living under a rock or maybe on holiday, didn't really kind of get an idea of what went on. So what was it as you saw it?
Okay, I mean, we can't be in the studio today and not talk about these two incidents. When we look at the incidents, there was two significant issues on Friday just gone. One with Microsoft Azure, one with CrowdStrike. Yeah. The Microsoft Azure one seems to have been a bit of a configuration change within a certain region of Azure. So Azure's separated up into different regions globally. And in one of those regions, there was a config change which resulted in some workloads going offline. The impact seems to have been quite minimal. We called up all of our Azure customers first thing on Friday morning, and unfortunately, none of them were impacted because none of them were using that region for that. But roughly around the same time was the CrowdStrike issue, which was significantly more impactful, essentially. So the impact of this was 8.6 million devices, Windows devices, receiving essentially blue screen of death. So the device is turned on, but you can't do anything with it. And you get this lovely frowny face in Windows 11 to say, there's an issue. Initial reporting was a little bit confused. It's fair to say, the tech reporters were kind of confusing the CrowdStrike one, causing the Azure outage, and that's not the case.
Yeah.
From what we know,
totally separate,
and what we see in they're completely separate incidents.
Just bad timing, really.
Just bad timing, really. Yeah, exactly. But the CrowdStrike one is essentially people with Windows machines that had CrowdStrike installed weren't able to use their Windows machines. And then obviously if we look at that, the knock-on impact to that is that, airports start to delay flights, maybe cancel flights, critical infrastructure is impacted. We see things like, basic things like payment terminals in supermarkets unable to take any kind of payment. So the knock-on impact to that has been quite big, actually.
Yeah, and I think that was kind of as you watch the news unfolded, and actually, fortunately for us as a company, we don't run CrowdStrike, but that's not us pointing fingers either, because while this was an incident that revolved around CrowdStrike and obviously around Microsoft as separate incidents, that could easily have been other vendor, put two other vendors in there.
It could have been any other vendor.
And so while we were fortunate as a business, we didn't wake up to blue screen of death everywhere. It was interesting to kind of see how the news rolled out. And actually the thing that was capturing the attention was that kind of public facing impact. As you said, we were seeing here in the UK, train companies saying you could only buy tickets on the train, you couldn't buy them in the terminals, and lots of this was because while we think of Windows as the thing on your desktop so that you can send emails, actually, Windows ends up in all kinds of places. It's those kind of, it's running terminals, it's those big display screens. It's all of these areas. I mean, my favorite meme that I saw on Friday was the Sphere in Las Vegas with the blue screen of death on it. And if actually that did happen in Vegas and it had a blue screen of death on, I mean, I would have loved to have seen it. I'm assuming it was a meme, but so it's interesting, isn't it? Kind of the tentacles of IT stretching.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so impactful
as a society, we rely on technology. Everything that we do, technology is ingrained into it. And so when there's an impact of this scale, everything is impacted, and strange things that you wouldn't expect. Things like, I want to, buy a coffee from Tesco or whatever. I can't because I can't use the terminal. Yep. So you've got to go and speak to someone in the shop and engage with a human being instead of using the technology. So
exactly. Not what
so
we're
it's
in
one of
for.
those. But I mean, when we look at what actually caused this, there's been some technical analysis done, not just by CrowdStrike themselves, but within the technical community, because, within the technical community, we like to understand how tech works. So what has happened here, and what we can say about this, and some of the details are yet to come out, is that the cause of the outage was essentially an update file which has caused an issue. So the way the CrowdStrike works is very similar to every other kind of vendor that does security software. So there's a agent that sits quite low level within the operating system. So it's quite a trusted driver. So it sits at the kernel level. And then it engages with files, update files, in this case called channel files with CrowdStrike, that add capability to that agent to be able to detect new attack techniques. So CrowdStrike had observed some what's called named pipes in Windows. So named pipes are used to communicate with different processes or interconnect within the system itself. And they were being abused essentially by bad actors. Yep. So an update file is then needed to stop that from being able to be possible on the machine. Now, unfortunately, so this update mechanism happens several times every single day. It's fundamental to the way that this works. It just happens that this one file caused some kind of issue. Now, that issue looks to be that essentially memory was referenced that shouldn't have been, and the operating system detects that and crashes the system to protect the rest of the system, right? And so that's what the cause was. So devices that received this update file, over-the-air update file, between a certain time frame were impacted. And they were impacted up until a point at which either that file was deleted, so a manual deletion by an IT person to then bring that system online, or the update file was automatically updated by rebooting the machine. But this kind of comes back to the way that security software is so ingrained into operating systems. If we look at kernel level, so kernel level is the base system level. It's how the operating system works. Any kind of kernel driver in there and CrowdStrike CS agent runs at that level. It's running at the highest trusted level possible. Now on Windows, what it will do is when something crashes, it'll actually, it can disassociate that driver at the next boot. So essentially, if that driver is continually crashing, it will just disassociate it, and then the system should ultimately come back online. The problem that we saw with this CrowdStrike issue is that because certain flags were set on that driver, that was never going to happen.
Yeah.
So it really comes down to the use of those kind of highly trusted drivers and its security software. So it's always going to run like that. And then secondly, the quality of the release of the software.
So it's interesting kind of that description as well, because it raised a couple of areas of consideration for me. And if you take both issues, so while they're, again, not related, but their impact potentially, was similar. So if you take what happened with Microsoft, and I think here in the UK, by the time we'd kind of got out of bed, Microsoft had addressed a lot of those problems. And while we saw some degradation of services across Azure and 365, fundamentally services were online. Yeah. So all all good to an extent. And obviously the issue with CrowdStrike, so for most companies, they've invested in what happened to be CrowdStrike in this case. They're running CrowdStrike everywhere. So when it goes wrong, as it did in this case, and it shouldn't have done, and CrowdStrike have talked about kind of an automated software validation process that failed.
Yeah, the QA process,
But the two questions it raised for me, one was, should we rely on single vendors, single bits of infrastructure to deliver our infrastructure? So, that's one question. And then the other question actually was the one you was talking about kind of the way that these, security software solutions often will work, that they are pushing out these updates. And the reason they push these updates out is to see they've identified potentially a new threat. So they're sending out something to their intelligent agents going, look, if you see this kind of activity, do something about it. And often we'll talk about this, and I think it's useful that IT has kind of shifted this way when it comes to talk about security. We're starting to look at risk. So this is not so much about, we need to secure, we need to do this. What are the risks of these things happening? I think, I'll get around to the question it raised for me, but the question about that thing about the update. So it's a very easy answer to say, well, those updates shouldn't get pushed out. But the risk is, what do we do? Do we say, well, let's delay our security software getting this important update that's going to stop a potential threat that's been seen in the wild, is potentially an active threat? Do we stop it because it might break the machine? But if we don't roll it out straight away, what's the risk of us then being impacted by this potential threat? Because actually the thing we haven't done is patched kind of the problem, So I mean, has it made you think about that? What's your view on, should we just allow these things to run, or, should we look at how we kind of patch these kind of things in future?
Okay. So I think, I've toyed with this over the weekend, actually, so for me, it comes down to risk.
Yeah.
So are we looking at one vendor, or should we be looking at a number of vendors across the estate? So that was one of your questions earlier. The issue with that is then you've got different areas of risk with that.
Yeah.
How do you maintain one security policy across all vendors? Do all vendors have the same features? Do we have the skill set to be able to deploy them and manage them appropriately? So that's something that businesses should weigh up themselves. We often speak about visibility. If we've got a plethora of different vendors, how do we maintain the visibility that we actually know what's going on throughout the estate? Whereas putting it with one vendor, you tend to get quite good and predictable visibility in.
Yeah.
So I don't think that people would necessarily be rushing to take CrowdStrike out in its entirety on the back of this. To your second point about the patching, do we delay patching because of this type of incident? Again, it comes down to risk. The updates that happen with CrowdStrike and every security vendor happens daily, several times a day. This is the first time that we know of that's caused this kind of, first time that we know of that it's gone wrong because of the scale at which it's gone wrong. So it comes down to the QA processes within the vendor, really. But if we delay patching that, you don't know if you're being targeted by that attack already. So if we talk about the named pipes, which was the attack vector, without that file on, you could be being attacked now.
Yeah.
So if you don't have that attack definition file on there, you could be being exploited now. At what point are you going to patch that? Next week? 3 days time? Okay, that's 3 days in your infrastructure of someone doing you don't know what. And it's the unknown. That's where the risk lies, the unknown. So, okay, you're taking a view of you trust your security vendor to do the right thing for you, and in this case, it obviously they got it wrong. But what's ultimately the business risk? Okay, we've got a bit of downtime. Businesses will recover from that. Are there any malicious, extortion attempts going on? No. If it is purely just an outage with the vendor, no. As your data being leaked online, no. Are we going to be having to contact the ICO? No. As the competitor got our details? No. Okay, well that's it's not a cyber attack. Whereas the flip side is if you're not patching it, or you might be open to all of that, and you don't know.
Yeah, and a recovery process from that having been a cyber attack with similar kind of impact, the recovery process from that, and while your heart goes out to somebody with 40,000 endpoints,
couple of thousand endpoints,
having to deal with that problem.
Yeah, they're busy.
But dealing with that problem at scale when it's been a ransomware attack, because actually we asked the vendors to stop. And this shouldn't be an easy out for any vendor. That these processes, these things have to work. The fact that this could brick any Windows device as easily as it did, how that wasn't captured beforehand.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. If I was using CrowdStrike, I'd be quite annoyed at them right now. Yeah. To say, look, I've paid you, I've bought the service, and I've had some outage that should never have happened. But having an outage like that, it's fixable. Yeah. Whereas when you look at the attackers, on the flip side of it, okay, if we don't patch, are we open to that risk? How much are we open to that risk then becomes the question. What is the impact of that risk of not doing it? Yeah. So I'm an advocate for patching. I don't think that companies should wait to patch. I think that there needs to be a clear pilot group. Some people call it canary releases. You release to a small number of devices, assess for the impact. If there isn't any, you can go wider. The issue with doing that from a cybersecurity vendor is, let's say, for example, a CrowdStrike were to say, we release to a small group of canary customers first, and then we release to the others. How do they pick who those canary customers are?
And it is different as well. This, as you said in the beginning when you was describing it, this was a kind of a channel update. So this was a real time.
Regular.
We need to update the engine because we've seen this kind of new threat. This is not a patch. This is not a software update in the way that we might think of patch. So it is a little bit different, but I think it does still raise a question. And I suppose one of the things we call us podcast takeaways for a reason. The idea is that we like to give people things that they can take away. And I think rather than having takeaways from this episode per se, I actually think the takeaways are the way to use, I think, what happened on Friday for lots of organisations, whether you was impacted or you were not, because I think, as we said earlier on, that while this happened to be CrowdStrike that had the biggest impact, and obviously Microsoft had some impact with what happened there as well. I think while it happened to be those two on Friday, I think anybody turning around and saying, well, it couldn't have been me is probably a little misguided.
It's delusional.
Yeah,
it's delusional. I mean, people need to understand where the risks lie in their business, and have a playbook for when something goes wrong. If we look at the pandemic, no one predicted that, but everyone experienced it.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the thing I'd want us to take away from this is, use that experience that people saw on Friday and say whether you was impacted or you wasn't, and look at that and think, okay, what do I need to consider going forward? What do I need to think? Do I need to think about, well, actually, I won't run security vendor across all my work, but if you're going to do that, appreciate that comes with operational, that comes with risk in itself. It comes with additional cost, comes with operational overhead. It's not quite as easy as saying, oh, well, I'll put vendor A here and vendor B there. There's all kinds of additional considerations that go with that. So I suppose it is just use this as, I think, an opportunity to say, hey, we can learn from this. So let's make sure that actually if this thing happens again, are we better insulated? And I think, like you said, is the consider the risk of doing this kind of stuff as well. This is a risk versus reward versus impact kind of conversation. What's the risk? What's the impact? And what's the cost of both being impacted and addressing fixing the potential impact? So, I mean, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that sums it up quite well. Understand the risk. Do some tabletop exercises, within your business to understand where those risks lie, and if you're comfortable with them.
Yeah, and I think actually that piece about tabletop exercise, look at almost this worst case scenario thing. All of our PCs are off. What do we do as a business? How do we,
If your incident response plan is on your SharePoint site and all your PCs are off, you're not getting to your incident response plan. Go and print it out.
Yeah, and don't just have people sat there looking at screens going, I don't know. Yeah. Jake, it's been great. I think, we're kind of doing this just a few days after, not all of the information about what happened with both Microsoft. I mean, Microsoft, I think, published quite a lot of what went on with them. CrowdStrike are giving us more information as we go. But it definitely could have been something that happened. It wasn't ideal, but these are the things that we want to prepare us for. So some great insight. Really appreciate it, Jace. So if you've enjoyed this episode of Tech Takeaways, I'm sure you have. Why wouldn't you? Then do subscribe. You can subscribe here on YouTube. Down below, you know where to do that kind of thing. Or you can find us in all good homes podcasts and potentially some bad ones as well. And if you've got ideas for shows going forward, then hey, leave a comment. Wherever you're consuming this, or ping us a note, and on social media, whatever, ping us a note, and we'd love to take those ideas and turn them into shows as well. So until next time, thanks for joining us. We'll see you on the next Tech Takeaways.